the Final Fantasy Legend. This is what we called the first Saga game when it released in the US. Though it's not technically a Final Fantasy game, due to its Western release on the Game Boy, it's often viewed as the very first Final Fantasy spin-off. It's considered to be one of the best RPGs on the Game Boy, and it even rivals the console releases at the time, like Final Fantasy 1 and 2, and even Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3. Kicking off the entire Saga franchise, the very first Final Fantasy Legend game stayed on the Game Boy in the US until later getting a port on the Nintendo Switch, Android, and iOS and Windows starting in 2020. Japan, however, received one exclusive remake to the WonderSwan Color back in 2002. But thanks to fan translations, we can now actually play the WonderSwan remake in English. But is it worth playing? I hope that I can help answer that question for you today, so without further ado, let's talk about the Final Fantasy Legend. Makai Toushi SaGa was released in Japan on December 15th, 1989 on the Game Boy, almost an exact year after the release of Final Fantasy II on the Famicom. On September 30th, 1990, the game was released in North America with the name changed to the Final Fantasy Legend. The very first Final Fantasy game made excellent numbers in North America, so the decision to change it from Saga to Final Fantasy was purely a marketing strategy. They weren't totally sure that an RPG on the original Game Boy was gonna sell that well in America, so they opted to change the name to Final Fantasy because they knew that it would sell some pretty good numbers. So it's June 1989 in Japan. The Game Boy was just released and Tetris was proving to be one of the most popular games ever made. Square's president, Masafumi Miyamoto, is eager to capitalize on the success of mobile gaming, and he asks his developers to make their very first Game Boy game. Akitoshi Kawazu and his partner, Koichi Ishii, decided that instead of creating a game similar to Tetris, they would produce what they felt that the customers desired the most: a role-playing game. In doing some research for this game, I actually found out that it was Hironobu Sakaguchi who teamed up Ishii with Kawazu with the distinct message to them that they deserved to earn the experience of having a video game fail. So, needless to say, he wasn't very confident in this Game Boy project. The original concept that Square had was to create a game that could be picked up and finished in about 6 to 8 hours. More specifically, they wanted to make a game that could be easily finished in the time that it took an airplane flight between Narita, Japan and Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm not sure why that was the case, but that was the goal that they had. Akitoshi Kawazu was director of the game and worked alongside Koichi Ishii as the two lead designers. The start of the Saga series marked the last time that Akitoshi Kawazu would have any direct involvement with the mainline Final Fantasy franchise, as the success of the first Saga game spawned an entire franchise of its own that Kawazu would be the lead director of. Koichi Ishii would work on Final Fantasy III next, but would then go on to make Final Fantasy Adventure and act as the lead director of the Mana franchise. Takashi Tokita worked on the scenario, sprite graphics, character design, and the sound effects. Tokita would later go on to be the lead game designer of Final Fantasy IV, the director of Live Alive, and one of the directors of Chrono Trigger and the director of Parasite Eve. Hiroyuki Ito helped with the scenario as well as designed the maps of the game. He would later go on to be the co-director of Final Fantasy VI. Nobuo Uematsu was back again as the composer of the game with a whopping 16 songs for the limited Game Boy capability. The release of the Final Fantasy Legend was easily the best game release that Square had ever seen at the time. It was the very first title they ever sold to sell over 1 million copies. This was a very clear indication that sequels needed to be made, and thus the Saga franchise was born. Like I had mentioned in the intro to this video, there was one remake that was exclusive to Japan on the WonderSwan Color. It included bug fixes, quality of life changes, completely brand new cutscenes to the game. Many people consider the WonderSwan Color remake of the Final Fantasy Legend is easily the best version of the game to play if you're gonna play it today. Square recently released the collection of Saga, Final Fantasy Legend, on Switch, Android, and iOS and Windows, but this is just a port of the original 3 Final Fantasy Legend games, not any of the remakes. It's still yet to be announced whether or not America will ever receive an official localization of the very first Makai Toushi SaGa on the WonderSwan Color. But thanks to English translations and modding, I was able to play an English localized version of Makai Toushi SaGa on the WonderSwan Color. So that's the version that I played, that's the version that I'm going to be reviewing for you guys. I'm incredibly excited to let you guys know all of my thoughts and feelings about the game, but before I do, I'm actually going to hand it over to DavidVinc, and he's going to let you know what he thought of the game.
Hi Gavin and everybody, thank you so much for having me. This is David over at the channel DavidVinc, and today I want to talk about Final Fantasy Legend and specifically what it kind of meant for me growing up. I got a Game Boy whenever I was about 7 or 8 years old. It came out in 1989, but I think I got it around 1990. And for the longest time, up until about 96, whenever I entered high school, there was really only about 5 RPGs for the system. There was Final Fantasy Adventure, there was Sword of Hope, and then there were the 3 Final Fantasy Legend games. The first, of course, being the Final Fantasy Legend, which I have right here. What was very nice about this game was that it had great replayability. You could choose whatever party you wanted. You could choose between humans, mutants, or monsters. And some were better than others, but as a kid, I didn't really realize that. I just kept on using whatever parties I wanted to, morphing my monsters into different beings and different creatures, using all these different magical spells for my mutants, and kicking ass with swords with my humans. It was a whole lot of fun, and I loved how you can kind of change things up. If you wanted to use humans, you would have to spend a lot of money on them in order to purchase all of their equipment, as well as purchase their stat gains. You had to buy them HP, or strength, or agility. If you wanted to save some money, you would use a monster, because they couldn't equip anything anyway, or otherwise you kind of had a middle of the road there with the mutants, where they could learn 4 magical spells, but you could also equip them with armors and weapons and things like that. It was also really cool because it was just so vast, I suppose. There were 4 different worlds. You had the first world, the world of continent. The second world, the world of the ocean, where you got a boat you can kind of sail around to different towns and everything. Then the third world was the world of sky, where you could fly around and soar in an airship and everything. You kind of thought that you were at the paradise, but you weren't. And then finally, there was the world of ruins, which consisted of a bunch of ruined towns. It was kind of like a futuristic, post-apocalyptic world. And it was very fun to explore these worlds, because at the time, you have to remember whenever this came out, the SNES wasn't even out. All we really had in America was Final Fantasy and the first 3 Dragon Quests. Dragon Quest IV wasn't even out whenever this game came out, so it was kind of a game changer, being able to explore all these different places and choose whatever races you wanted to play around with as well. It was one of my favorite games growing up, and it does mean a lot to me. I spent so much time on this. Thank you again, Gav, for having me, and everybody else, have a good day.
Thank you so much, David, for coming on the show today. I'm going to go ahead and leave a link down below to DavidVinc's channel. If you like what he does, if you like his personality, go ahead and check him out, give him a subscribe as well. Also, all of the footage that you're going to be seeing throughout this video of the Final Fantasy Legend WonderSwan version, all of that was captured by David himself on his YouTube channel, so I'll leave a link down there below if you want to watch him play through that video game. But again, thank you so much, David, for coming on the show. This is my first kind of big collaboration video, so I'm just happy that you agreed to it. My kids got real rowdy, so now we're filming at night. Sorry if the mic or anything else seems different. But now that you all kind of know the history of the Final Fantasy Legend and kind of how Saga became a franchise, and you've heard David's thoughts on the game, I'm gonna go ahead and let you know what I thought about the game, but before I do, let me know your thoughts of the game. Did you play the original Game Boy release? Did you play it when it was ported onto the Nintendo Switch or on PC? Did you play the WonderSwan Color remake? Let me know your thoughts on the game. I want to have a conversation with you all in the comments below. Also, while you're down there, go ahead and hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell as well, so that you are notified whenever new videos like this go live. With all that said, let's talk about the Final Fantasy Legend proper with what I thought was good about the game. And when talking about this game, I feel like it's important for me just to upfront say that I recognize and fully appreciate that this game is full to the brim with incredibly cool ideas. Not every single thing about this game landed with me, and we'll talk more about some of that stuff later in this video. But when I look at this game and I consider the time of its release and I see what the creators had brought to the table conceptually, you can just tell that this game was created to be a handheld game that was better than the console games out at the time. And for me, looking at this game, I think the biggest positive that I have is the world building and the world setup. So before I go into those specifics, I think we should at least talk about what the plot of this game is. So there's this tower that stands in the middle of the world that's said to lead straight to paradise. You take control of 4 heroes who make it their goal to reach the top of the tower. But before they can enter it, they need to break the seal on the entrance. Once the heroes have obtained the black crystal, which was needed in order to open the tower door, they're ambushed by one of the 4 fiends who was guarding that crystal. After defeating the fiend and start heading up the tower, they discover that there are brand new worlds on higher floors of the tower. The heroes discover that each world has a crystal that helps them move further up, but they also learn that the fiends who are guarding the crystals are all being controlled by Ashura, a very powerful entity. And after they make their way to the top, they face off against Ashura and defeat him. After falling through a trapdoor, the heroes make their way back up the tower, and then they come face to face with God, or the creator, depending on which version you're playing. God then explains to the heroes that Ashura, the fiends, and the tower were all created as a game for God to just watch, so that he could just watch the heroes defeat some evil. Frustrated by this, the heroes decide to reject this reward that God offers to them for beating the game, and instead they decide to kill him. And after killing God, the heroes decide not to continue through the door that stands before them, and instead they head back down the tower, back to their own world. And that's the overall plot in a nutshell. I'll talk a little bit more about very specific details of the plot kind of as we get further into the video, but as a world building standpoint, just in regards to all of these worlds that you see in the game, I really like and I really appreciate the variety of worlds that we do have here in the game. Outside of the consistent gameplay mechanics, each world kind of feels like you've hopped into a whole new game. The starting continent world feels like your tropey RPG setting for the time. Castles, towns, dungeons, you're fighting ogres. It feels like your standard RPG setting for this time. The second world has all these floating islands that you can ride around, and then you spin your main dungeon underwater. The third world, which is my favorite world in the game, is high above the clouds and has such a whimsical charm that kind of felt like it was crafted by Hayao Miyazaki at some points. And then the final world is just so different from everything else, the world of Ruin. I'll talk a little bit more about this world as we get a little further into the video, but conceptually, this is such a wild card, and I really dig it. Because you'd think that the further that you go up in the tower, the more it would start to resemble paradise, especially since the world right beforehand was high above the clouds. You'd think that this is going to be something even more angelic than that, but no. It looks like the real world, and it looks like it's just been hit by a horrible apocalypse. Overall, I just think that the world design and art direction of these worlds, it's a positive for me. I like the varying world designs. And I'll mention this here too, because I do kind of see this as a world building aspect of the game, but I also really like the references to different lores, mythologies, and religions. The tower in the center is clearly a reference to the Tower of Babel, found in the Christian Bible, where the people who built it had this ultimate goal of reaching God before God ultimately knocked the tower down and made everyone speak different languages. The 4 fiends that you encounter in the game are all based on the 4 symbols, which are mythological beasts from Chinese constellation. You have Siryu, the azure dragon, representing water, spring, and east. Suzaku, the vermilion bird, representing fire, summer, and the south. Byakko, the white tiger, representing wind, autumn, and the west. And Genbu, the black tortoise, representing earth, winter, and north. I probably butchered some of those names, how they're properly pronounced, but you get the idea. And Ashura is obviously a reference to the Ashura found in many Indic religions, and is even visually represented in a way that kind of closely resembles the demigods found in those different religions. And up to the point that this game was released, Final Fantasy 1 and 2 hadn't really included a ton of symbolism like this. I'm sure in those games there's more hidden meaning and symbolism to be found that aren't just references to things like Star Wars, Dungeons and Dragons, and other pop culture stuff. But it seems like this game, as we kind of entered those late 80s and early 90s stages of video games, that's whenever Square really started dipping their toes in the more philosophical storytelling that we would really start seeing in the 90s. Another thing about this game that I really like to see is the level of party customization. You have humans, monsters, and mutants, or espers in the Japanese version. And like David said, having all of these options just right at the gate is huge as far as replayability goes. You can play a whole game with all monsters, all mutants, all humans, mix it up however you want, make your starting party member whatever you want. There is a ton of replayability just in the amount of options that it gives you up front. And since, of course, I'm talking about the WonderSwan Color version of the game, there are a ton of quality of life improvements to this game that really make this WonderSwan Color version far more superior than the original Game Boy, in my opinion. Obviously, stuff like the dash option to make movement faster, battle memory, like you don't have to scroll through the menus to do the exact same thing that you did the previous turn. You can just kind of hold down A and it just does all of the turns that you chose the previous turn again. And you're also able to see what monster that you'll turn into before you decide to eat the meat. In the original Game Boy release, if you wanted to change your monster into a different monster by eating some meat that an enemy drops, it was purely random. You didn't know what you were going to turn into. Thankfully, the WonderSwan Color version gives you a little menu with all of the stats so you know exactly what you're getting into if you decide to let your monster eat the meat. So these are all things that I think the game did pretty well. So now that we've talked about what I felt was really good about the game, let's go ahead and move on to the things that I was a little mixed on. These are things that I think maybe were good conceptually, but kind of bad in execution, things that I was neither here nor there on. These are just things I felt mixed on. And the first thing, unfortunately, is the music of the game. Nobuo Uematsu did a fantastic job composing the music given the limitations that the Game Boy had. However, I think those limitations really hindered the depth at which he could compose these tracks. Only 3 notes could be played at a time with the Game Boy's sound card, so it's not like Nobuo Uematsu could really compose some sort of symphonic masterpiece like Dancing Mad or something like that for the Game Boy. So honestly, with these limitations in mind, I think even just when it was translated to the WonderSwan Color, where you could add more orchestration, add more instruments to the background, the music just comes across a little weak to me. It's one of those games where if you needed to grind out some levels or something like that, or grind for some money, I just kind of had the music muted, played something else, played a podcast. The music just wasn't all that memorable to me. Like I said, I mean, as far as Game Boy music goes, it's actually probably one of the better soundtracks out there. It's just, the hardware limitations, it wasn't as good as I think it really could have been if it was on something, say, like the Super Nintendo. And moving on to some of the story aspects, like I mentioned with the plot, I think that there are some pretty interesting ideas that are proposed in the story. However, I don't think that the overall story is compelling whatsoever, and I think that primarily has to do with the fact that none of your characters have any personality whatsoever. Every now and then, some characters will talk to one another in the party, but there was never any sort of point in the story where I thought that these characters knew each other in any way. Every now and then, you might find something a little nuanced in the storytelling. For instance, there's a portion of the game where you enter a library and you find this dead family. And the father has a note right next to him where he explains how everyone starved to death trying to climb up the tower. Moments like these are nice, to have in a story like this, but those moments are so fleeting and they evaporate so fast, it's not like I can actually feel like they're truly connected into the plot of this story. So overall, I think the plot is fairly bland. And to talk a little about gameplay and enemy design, things of that nature, I think that the enemy design here is unfortunately way too repetitive. I think that in general, the enemy design is really good. It's just that the enemies repeat themselves far too often. You'll find a certain kind of enemy in the first continent world, and then as you're gearing up to beat the game, you're in the last fifth, climbing up the tower again, you will encounter plenty of the same enemies that you found in the first world, but just with color differences, tiny little cosmetic tweaks, maybe a different name. The designs are just the same, and they're just way too repetitive. And the last thing in this little section, I hope I'm not the only person who's alone in something like this, but when looking at the overworld maps of all of these different worlds, each world is just a square. Whenever you move to one side of the screen, you don't come looping back around to the other side of the screen. It's nothing like that. You get to one side, and it's like you just hit a wall, or like the world just ends right there. Maybe it's just a hardware limitation. Maybe it's an artistic design. I'm not sure. But having your character just stop at the end of these worlds makes the worlds feel really small. I think if you could loop around, it felt like you were maybe going across like a whole globe or something like that. I don't know. I think it might have made the game feel a little bigger. Like I said, this might have just been a hardware limitation. Maybe it's another piece of symbolism that I just didn't catch, about the world just ending on either side around you. I'm not totally sure, but it's one of those things that personally, I just think that it would have been a better gameplay design decision to just not make it a square. So as we've just gone over, this game isn't perfect. It's got a lot of charm to it. It's got a lot that I like. It's got a few things I'm mixed on, but it definitely has some things that I just downright hated. There's some things that I really did not like about this game whatsoever. So let's go ahead and be a little negative here and talk about the bad. And I don't even feel sorry about this one. I'll just get it up and front, just out of the way. I hated being in the world of Ruin. I know I talked about how conceptually it's super interesting, and I fully still stick to that idea, but as gameplay goes, as just playing a video game goes and being in this world, it sucks. It's a horrible time. I wanted to turn off the game when I got to this world. It's virtually impossible to take a step in this overworld without encountering Suzaku, the boss of the crystal of this world. You're always encountering it in battle, and you can't kill it until a certain point in the story. So every time you encounter it, you gotta run away from it. But fleeing from it isn't easy, and you'll have to just endure a huge amount of damage to your party and do nothing about it every time that you encounter it. And outside of just walking around in the overworld, the dungeon design here is really poor in my opinion, regularly relying on your ability to navigate paths that you're simply just unable to see. It's one of my least favorite puzzle design choices of any video game. I don't know why game designers decide to do this in their games. They just put you into a room and they say, just press a bunch of directional buttons, get into battles randomly, and then hopefully you find your way through the puzzle. Good luck. Hate it. And just the bulk of your time in this world is spent heading back and forth doing fetch quests. And this was in a time before anyone knew how to make anything interesting or engaging involving fetch quests. Something like The Witcher, great quests in that game. I'll gladly do some fetch quests in The Witcher. And this game, dude, just roll the freaking credits already. Like, come on, that was frustrating. I just did not like being in this world whatsoever. And really, the only other big thing that I just was not a fan of in this game is the leveling system. For some reason, with all of the characters, all of the classes, everyone's progression system has this weird catch-22 to it, where it's like, you level up to some degree, but at a consequence also. Humans don't naturally increase their stats at the end of battles, so instead you have to spend money on consumable items that gradually increase your stats like health, agility, etc., and this makes your human character incredibly expensive to manage. Unless you're totally prepared on spending a ton of money in the game, I would not create a party full of humans. Mutants, or espers, level up normally, but the special abilities that they learn as they level up also change randomly, and not always for the better. Sometimes you'll have a mutant with some killer moves, only for the next battle to have this chance to change one of your really good moves for something completely useless to you. Sometimes it might be a really good move, sometimes more times it's probably going to be a move that you don't want. It's going to be totally useless. You went from having one special ability that your mutant was using that was just fully getting you through the entire world that you were in, and then level up. Oh, cool, this spell changed to this. Sorry, you don't have a choice. Hated that. That sucked. Your monsters can't equip any sort of equipment or weapons that you can buy at shops or find in treasure chests, and they don't level up conventionally either. They do, though, have an option to eat meat that other enemies will drop after battle, and that meat can turn your monster into a different kind of monster. So if you like one kind of monster you're using, but you want to get stronger, you have to just swap that monster for something different. Like I said earlier, to be fair, the WonderSwan Color version does include a quality of life change that allows you to see exactly what monster you will turn into if you decide to eat the meat that an enemy might drop. So realistically, in the WonderSwan version, this isn't much of an issue. But if you are playing the original Game Boy version, or you are playing the re-release that came out for PC and Switch and all that, this is still an issue that you're going to have to get past. So just know that anytime that you eat meat in those games, it's totally random. You don't really have a choice. You don't know what you're gonna get. It's fully random. And I hate, I'm not a fan of RNG like this in my RPGs. Sure, there's plenty of other aspects about the game that are dated compared to today, but I'm not necessarily just trying to compare a lot of these older video games to what we have today. I think that there's a ton of great ideas in this game, and there's a lot of charm that goes along with it. I've never played a Saga game. This is the very first Saga game I've ever played. So if going forward, they decide to take these aspects, these things that I have issues with, these really cool ideas that maybe just weren't executed properly, if they make those changes in the future, I'm incredibly excited to see what they have in store, because like I said, some things just don't hit the mark. They almost do, but they just don't. So like I said though, just comparing it to other stuff, I don't really think that it's a great thing to do, especially when trying to look at this game for what it is as a game itself, not trying to think about any other game series that's out or anything like that. I think just looking at this game as objective as I possibly can, with of course my subjective thoughts, I'm trying to really wrap my head around whether or not this game is worth playing today. Ultimately, the only answer that I can come to is I think it just depends on what you want. If you're someone like me who loves going down memory lane and taking, a history trip through the ages of video games or movies or whatever, and just seeing how these things got their start, I think that this is obviously a must play. If you want to know the Saga series more, you want to see that first initial story that they told in this universe, yes, play this game, absolutely. If you like seeing the story evolution, if you like seeing the gameplay evolution, seeing kind of how they got their grassroots in the Saga series, starting with the Final Fantasy Legend, yeah, I definitely think that this is worth taking a look. If you're someone who's just looking to pick up a game and just play it on the go, just a solid RPG, I personally would not say that this is a fantastic game to pick up. And I think David would agree with this as well, but I think also if you're someone who played the game back in the day, and maybe you've never checked out the WonderSwan version, maybe you just want to see how this game holds up again, see, just take a trip down memory lane with the re-released Switch ports, yeah, definitely pick it up. I think that you might have a great time. You might find more things that you liked about it that you didn't notice back when you played it. You might find that you really hate the game now, but sure, I think it's definitely worth picking up. From what I do know about the Saga series, yes, they pretty much all just go up from here. So if you're a gameplay first, story second kind of person, no, I wouldn't suggest starting with the Final Fantasy Legend. Definitely maybe pick up one of the later Saga games, or, any other Final Fantasy game if that's really the only reason you want to pick this up. Like I said, guys, I think that the reasons of why you might want to pick up this game vary for person to person. It's not for everyone. It might be right up somebody's alley. You just never know. And I hope that just through hearing my experience with the game and hearing my opinions on it and how I felt about the game, as well as David's as well with his experience and his review of the game, I hope that you can kind of come up with an answer for yourself on whether or not this game is for you or not. But that's gonna do it for me, guys. That's my review of the Final Fantasy Legend. Again, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell if you want to see more reviews, more Saga reviews, more Final Fantasy reviews. I'm looking forward to just playing more games in this series. I'm having a great time already, so this is fantastic. You definitely want to stick around for those videos. Also, thank you again, DavidVinc, for coming onto my channel. It was a blast to be able to throw this video together and have you in one of my videos. It's crazy. I've been watching your videos forever. But like I said, everyone, that's going to do it for me. I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.